Felix. As a child, Robin bears some similarity in her passiveness and blankness to a doll. The doll becomes an important metonym for the lesbian relationship itself and an object toward which charged emotional energies are focused. Nora and Robin share a doll they call their child, and when she becomes angered at Nora's possessiveness, Robin smashes the doll to the floor. Later, when Robin leaves Nora for a new lover, Jenny Petherbridge, the latter gives her a doll as a sign of their new relationship. O'Connor, ever wise in the meaning of partial objects, links dolls specifically to queer identity. This is number 4. The last doll given to age is the girl who should have been a boy, and the boy who should have been a girl. The love of that last doll was foreshadowed in that love of the first. The doll and the immature have something right about them. The doll, because it resembles but does not contain life, and the third sex, because it contains life but resembles the doll. This comparison of the queer and the doll summarizes the period's sexological characterizations of homosexuality as a stage of arrested bisexual development. But it hints at the performative character of queer identity, in which the doll becomes a theatrical surface upon which normal sexual relations are embossed. Where Krafft-Ebing or Havelock Ellis pathologized the third sex, for Barnes it seems to be a form of innocence that escapes both Felix's genealogical imperative and Nora's parental restrictions. O'Connor, in his late-night analytic session with Nora, encourages her to bow down to that innocence, for which the doll is a partial object, and accept difference as a mode of being. Nightwood was written at a transition point in eugenicist and sexological discourses, although the date of its origin is in dispute. Begun possibly as early as 1927 and published with the help of T.S. Eliot in 1936, it clearly chronicles Barnes' passionate love affair with Thelma Wood, which began in 1921 and ended in 1929. What did she say about Thelma? She said, I'm not a lesbian, I just loved Thelma. A complicated passage that many people have tried to parse. Despite the fact that many of her contemporaries and friends, Mina Loy, Natalie Barney, Gertrude Stein, T.S. Eliot, absorbed eugenics theories, Barnes is not known to have been interested in movements for racial purity, but her novel's cast of queers, cross-dressers, disabled persons, and racialized outsiders seems to be drawn from one of Bertillon or Lambroso's catalogs of defectives. The centerpiece of what Joseph Boone calls this demi-monde of the inappropriate is the circus. Most of the characters are in some way connected to carnival and theater as a sign of their marginal relationship to the dominant society. A lot of significant events happen in dressing rooms and backstage areas where the division between reality and fantasy, body and costume, human and animal become confused. The false baron, Felix Volkbein, frequents the circus because its denizens defy his acquisitive temperament. Quote, the circus was a loved thing that he could never touch, therefore never know. The people of the theater and the ring were for him as dramatic and as monstrous as a consignment on which he could never bid. Through Dr. O'Connor, we meet Nika, the black tattooed bear wrestler, and the trapeze artist Frau Mann, the Duchess of Broadback, and others, quote, gaudy, cheap cuts from the beast life, immensely capable of that great disquiet called entertainment. In a world where characters are already marked racially or sexually, the circus provides a richly embroidered backdrop for that inversion of roles that Bakhtin characterizes as the carnivalesque. Felix's obsession with royal titles is mimicked in the circus performer's adoption of titles. Princess Nadja, Principessa Stasera y Stasero, and King Buffo. Nora Flood is a publicist for the Denkman Circus in New York, she meets her love interest Robin Vogt in front of the lion cage. Robin leaves Nora for Jenny Petherbridge, whom she meets at a performance of Rigoletto, an opera with a court jester and a hunchback in its title role. Robin meets Nora at an evening at Count Altamonte's, in which the attendees are described as living statues. O'Connor's speeches themselves always seem to be dramatic monologues full of quotations from plays. In his preface, Eliot compared the novel to Elizabethan tragedy. Felix provides the best gloss on the value of carnival performativity when he says, quote, one's life is peculiarly one's own when one has invented it. Readers may hear vestiges of Wildean aestheticism in this remark, and indeed Felix does seem to be a kind of deterritorialized dandy, but it achieves particular historical valence in the context of Weimar-era disruptions. Perhaps most important in reinforcing the carnivalesque are the many references to animals. Robin is described as a beast becoming human, and elsewhere Dr. O'Connor describes her as an eland coming down an aisle of trees, a hoof raised in the economy of fear. Like the animal trainers and sideshow characters in Todd Browning's movie Freaks, circus performers often resemble the animals they tend. In the novel's last scene, Robin, in order to demonstrate her abject status to Nora, gets down on all fours in front of Nora's dog, barking and crawling after him in a fit of laughter, obscene and touching. The obvious inversion of the word God in dog, the fact that Robin performs this act while in a chapel, suggests the ultimate reversal of theological and sexual values implied in the eugenicist term degeneration. With respect to our concern with biological futurity, such moments call into question species identity and blur the boundaries between the human and animal, animate and inanimate, sacred and profane. Robin's much analyzed imitation of a dog seems less a sign of her lesbian abjection, as critics have said, than a fulfillment of O'Connor's injunction to Nora to bow down to an animal nature her rational human nature repudiates. There is more in sickness than the name of that sickness. Thus far, critics have devoted extensive attention to the novel's feminist, lesbian, and anti-racist features, but they have not attended to its representation of disability, either as a set of characters within the novel or as a diagnostic tool for testing attitudes about bodily normalcy. On the one hand, Barnes trades in rather typical stereotypes of impairment as character flaw, Guido's mental illness and his father's monocular vision being the most obvious. On the other hand, disability underlies many of the characterizations of marginality in the novel, making it a kind of identity for the stigmatized body, from Nicka's tattooed body to Robin's dementia. Despite his fake credentials as a doctor, Matthew O'Connor offers an excellent diagnosis of the social model of disability. Speaking of Guido's mental illness, he notes that, this is number 5 on your handout, he notes that his sanity is an unknown room. A known room is always smaller than an unknown. If I were you, the doctor continued, I would carry that boy's mind like a bowl picked up in the dark. You do not know what's in it. He feeds on odd remnants that we have not priced. He eats a sleep that is not our sleep. There is more in sickness than the name of that sickness. In the average person is the peculiar that has been scuttled, and in the peculiar the ordinary that has been sunk. People always fear what requires watching. Instead of regarding Guido as a defect or retarded child, O'Connor treats him as a field of potential, a reminder of the peculiar that the rational mind must repress. O'Connor anticipates current theoretical accounts that regard disability not as the name that medicine gives to impairment, but as those limits that the so-called average person imposes on the non-traditional body and cognition. His remarks recognize the anxiety, what Addo Quazin calls aesthetic nervousness, over bodily contingency that disability occasions among able-bodied persons. As O'Connor concludes in a remark that could apply to many of the marginal figures in Nightwood, people always fear what requires watching. Since all of the characters in the novel are the objects of a scopic regime, whether as theatrical actors or cross-dressing freaks, they require watching. O'Connor's play of words on require suggests that persons with disabilities require policing and monitoring, yet their difference fascinates and amazes.